In the regular debates about social justice issues, progressives, in my opinion, seem to hold the high ground on matters of fighting discrimination against minorities, defending the rights of immigrants, of gays and lesbians. We tend to have ethics on our side in discussions about immigration, education, poverty, access to health care, housing, and access to food. But when our critics have run out of ammunition on every other moral front, many of them will play what they believe to be their trump card. But how come you favor abortion? I don't know exactly how they say it because I just read it in the blogs on the newsletter, but in my mind it's like, but how come you're in favor of abortion? Because some of my critics seem to think that topic is their crucifix, wooden stake, holy water, and garlic to protect them from the obvious conclusions of facts and information. Frankly, when I adopted an abandoned baby from a third world country, I felt like I'd cast my vote on abortion. I'm not in favor of abortions per se, but I am dramatically and emphatically in favor of a woman's right to manage her own reproductive life. I personally will never have an abortion. And other than a really bad old Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, it's probably not ever going to be an issue. So I consider myself to not be a member of the club that needs to be consulted about women's health issues. But controversial issues are used to just dismiss people when you can't think of any other good reason to dismiss them. It's called redirection in argumentation. I was having a debate with a guy in which I quoted Thomas Jefferson, and he was very unhappy, and he interrupted me and said, you surely can't quote Thomas Jefferson. He owned slaves. You can't take him seriously. And you have to admit, I mean, owning a slave is a bad thing. It's as repugnant and horrible and virtually unforgivable as anything you can think of, but does that mean that Washington and Franklin and Jefferson had no redeeming qualities? But it's how we tend to just dismiss people. That's why we wanted to have both this Dirty Laundry song and Everybody Knows. It's this sense that gossip and slander and libel is the kind of thing that everybody knows. Everybody knows the dirt on somebody else. And if that's how you want to dismiss them, you can dismiss them. Dorothy Day, the founder of the Catholic Workers Movement, had an abortion and several affairs. Martin Luther King Jr., lots of affairs. Martin Luther, some pretty serious mental illnesses. Joan of Arc, clearly schizophrenic. Muhammad was a polygamist and maybe worse. Abraham Lincoln suffered from major depression, was probably bipolar. Gandhi refused to allow a physician to give his wife the antibiotics that would have saved her life. Winston Churchill smoked cigars, which is just one of the things I like about Winston Churchill. But I digress. If you look at history as if you were looking through the lens of a tabloid newspaper, and in many ways television news as well, you know, it's the give us dirty laundry stuff, you can begin to see the world as if it is entirely devoid of heroes. But if you look for people who have accomplished a great deal, who have alleviated suffering, who have liberated the oppressed and made the world a better place, you can find a lot of exciting and wonderful examples of outstanding giants in history. As you've heard me say before, the primary conflict in the pages of the Gospels is a conflict between a religion of piety and a teaching of radical compassion. The pious religious leaders lived their lives very carefully to be sure that they were never tainted by the world. They didn't become either ritually or ceremoniously unclean, but they also avoided doing anything wrong for which they could be accused of being a sinner or being unclean. And there are some good things to say about piety. Certainly, all of us who have kids, we want our kids to not have a criminal record. We want our kids to not get pregnant in high school. We don't want them to contract STDs or AIDS. We want our kids to be productive and responsible and to enjoy a good reputation. But you know, if your kid needs to go to treatment for addiction, do you want the rest of the world to view them for the rest of their lives predicated on the fact that they went to treatment for addiction? Should they be treated like a second or third class citizen for the rest of their lives? I mean, there's so many people that are out of work and cut out of business opportunities because they had a drug possession charge years ago. And our society is apparently okay with charging at least the children of the poor with a charge that's going to follow them for their entire lives. Is that how we really want to run our country? Is that who we really are? It is the fallacy of ad hominem to try to insult a person's character, to remove from them the credibility of their lives, and to take it away unjustly. And this is often the native tongue of religious people. We act like we're being pious when in fact we're just gossiping. We skewer a person like pinning a bug to a piece of poster board, and then we identify them as a welfare recipient, or they're on food stamps, or they're an alcoholic, or they're divorced, or they're gay, or they're a convict, or they're a dropout, or they're an adulterer, or they're lazy, or worse. And we have stooped to racism and derision based on language, nation of origin, or family. I mean, it's not even this whole E-Verify thing that's going on in Springfield now. It's not that we have a big immigration problem in this area. It's not that we're being overrun with illegal immigrants. It's not that they're taking jobs that anybody else really wants at the salaries that are being offered for them. But it is a subtle, insidious suggestion that maybe you need to sit in judgment of someone who happened to have been born on the wrong side of the river, that maybe somehow the accident of your birth makes you better than they are, and that we should somehow sit in judgment of them. That's not the nation I want to be a part of. That's not the community that I want to live in. Jesus, a friend to the most outcast, the most looked down upon people in that environment. And you know, Jesus was not a rabbi. Jesus didn't get the black robe and stole. He didn't get to go to seminary. Some people called him a rabbi, but he wasn't really. He wasn't a priest. He wasn't a cleric. He was just the son of a poor family born under dubious circumstances. I mean, in the sense that a carpenter was not a middle-class person in that society. If you were middle class, you owned land. It was the people who had to enter the trades because they owned no land. They were the most poor. So Jesus didn't get an education. Jesus wasn't treated well by the community, but yet he put himself in the position to teach. But he looked at those important dignitaries, the pious, the religious, the respectable community leaders, and he said, you know, God likes prostitutes better than he likes you. God prefers the company of corrupt politicians over priests and Levites and clergy. They didn't kill Jesus because he said that he was the Messiah. They killed Jesus because he said they weren't. They killed Jesus because of his criticism of the established order of banking, of government, and of religion. This is, I believe, one of the real crises of leadership in our world today. We have allowed our minds to be captured by the pious when what we really need in church and in government are leaders who can do something. There are people in public life who have lost their status. I was just old enough to be becoming aware of politics when in 1972, Edmund Muskie had to drop out of the presidential campaign because he wept. Because he wept. The same year, Thomas Eagleton was running as vice president, and they found out that he had been treated for depression, and his career ended. How many wonderful people then, since 1972, never ran for office because they didn't want to be identified by whatever weakness or personal problem they ever had. I've had people trying to recruit me to run for everything from school board to the state legislature, but I already know what it's like to be the victim of a Puritan witch hunt, and I would never subject myself to a public election process. Politics can be mean, but the church can be more mean. The church is the only army that shoots its own wounded. The church has had a tendency through the years to be cruel to people who have a problem. But the church is not the worst offender. The worst offender is usually family. The nip in the air this week reminds us that summer's coming to an end and fall is on the way. And in a couple of months, it'll be Thanksgiving, and then it'll be Christmas. This is my first full year as an orphan. And my daughter still lives with me. But pretty soon, my lifetime of traveling to be with parents on holidays will give way to waiting to see if my daughter will come home for the holidays. For more than 30 years, during those horrible, challenging years of being a full-time graduate student and a full-time pastor, but still having to load up the car and drive 8-9 hours to be with family at Thanksgiving and Christmas, exhausted and yet pressured to take what I euphemistically called holiday guilt trips so that I could get caught up on everything that I was doing wrong in my life. So let me say now, 2 months in advance, just a pastoral word to all of you who are hoping to have in-laws and outlaws coming to your patriarchal home during this holiday season. Jesus liked the prostitutes and the tax collectors more than Jesus liked the pious people who did everything right. You cannot judge your kids into perfection. You cannot manipulate your kids with guilt and judgment into becoming the happy family that you would like to have. You cannot gossip your way into having the church of your dreams, and you cannot dissect politicians' personal lives to create the country that you want to live in. Let the people of God say amen. Amen. Give me a politician with a track record of accomplishments, even if he or she has screwed up a few times along the way. Give me a church that's willing to stand for something, even if they don't always get it right. Give me a family full of interesting people who live their lives to the fullest, even if their skeletons are not in the closet anymore. They're hanging from the chandelier over the dining room table. I don't want my daughter to fail in marriage. I don't want her to fail in career or in life, but I don't want her to be afraid to try. Certainly not out of fear that her very reverend father would be judgmental while carving the turkey. What I'm suggesting is, give your kids a Christmas present early. Keep your opinions to yourself on Thanksgiving. I realized many years ago that the Jesus of the Gospels was tolerant of absolutely everything except intolerance. He was a friend to tax collectors and sinners. He hung out with prostitutes and the rejects of society. But the only people he ever yelled at, the only people he ever insulted, the only people he publicly condemned were the religious leaders who passed judgments on others. And that is consistent in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Mark Twain used to say that he would prefer to go to heaven for the weather, but to hell for the companionship. Ironically, it seems that Jesus felt more or less the same way, which gives us reason to hope for those of us who like to keep company with people who have bad reputations, but who are a lot less pious. On this one, I can clearly say, I'm voting with Jesus, and I hope you do too. Amen.